And Seth ended up running that weekend. He didn't run slower than an 8. He ended up going as fast as 880s that weekend, and he won the event. And I was just hooked right then from that point. So we get back from that event, and I'm looking up everything diesel drag racing. I'm full blown. Obviously, I'm a broke kid, right? I know that I can't do what Seth is doing, but I want to. And so I start looking into it. And at that time, NHRDA was really the only sanctioning event. So I'm looking into classes that they offered that I could fit in, within my budget. And at that time, they had an 1190 class, which was basically like what 770 is now in the eighth mile. That's 12 1190s in the quarter. And I was like, perfect. 1190 class. I don't have to have a roll cage. And that's still really fast. And so I cultivated this plan that I was going to P pump the engine. At this time, by now, I actually have a real job, what I consider a real job. I'm working at a construction company with my friend Tim. And so, we're working together all day, talking diesel stuff. And, he was our head diesel, guy, anyways. So, we're basically cultivating a plan to build a, 700 horsepower truck that could run 1190s. And around September of that year, I'm starting to play around with. I tried a 66 millimeter single turbo on the truck because we're starting to learn about single turbos and how they're just a little bit easier than compounds. And I ended up breaking the flex plate on the truck again because first gens, if you know them, the stock flex plates are trash. The second time I'd broken a flex plate by that point, and so I'm like, okay, well, we need to do a P pump engine anyways, and I need to switch to a lockup transmission anyways. I'm learning about what all that stuff is because Tim was he actually built his own transmissions at that time, so he's teaching me about transmissions. And he's teaching me about P pumps. So I'm like, okay, well, we know we need to go to a lockup transmission and a P pump. I'm going to take the truck apart. So I pull the engine out of the truck, I pull the transmission out of the truck, and I'm like, well, while I'm in here, I should probably address this rust. By now, the rust on the truck had started to get pretty bad. It actually, at that point, I'd already cut one of the rocker panels clean off of it because it was rusted out so bad, and ended up needing way more attention than I thought it, but it needed some help. So I take the truck apart with intentions of just doing rust repair, building a new engine and transmission, and go after this 1190 class. Well, like everything, it snowballs out of control. The rust was worse than I thought it was, so a lot of the sheet metal ended up being junk on it. And this thing slowly kind of snowballs into a full blown restoration again. And so at this point, we got the engine out. So instead of just P pumping it like we were originally going to, we might as well just rebuild the engine and build it for some power. Well, if we're going to build it for more power than what we need, then that means we were probably going to run the next class up, which was I can't remember what it was back then. I think it's what 670 evolved to now, so which is 1050. So I want to say maybe it was a 1050 index. And so we're like, well, at that point, I'm going to need a 6-point cage. And so I talked to Terry Baker, the guy that built my dad's race car, and he was like, if you're going to do a 6-point cage, just go ahead and do a 10-point cage, and then you'll be good to 850. You'll never have to worry about putting a cage in it again. And I was like, okay, that sounds smart. And I was thinking like, ooh, like a 10-point roll cage, that's super race car too. Like I like that. That's neat. So at that, even early on there, I was thinking about like race car minded stuff with this truck. Um, and so I ended up taking the truck to him. He put the 850 cage in it that is still in it to this day. Him and Jeff Stamper, same two people that worked on my dad's race car, put the cage in the truck for me. And because you guys got to remember, at that time, I still don't consider myself a fabricator yet, and I didn't have any lick of tooling to be able to do a roll cage. And Jeff and Terry did that roll cage for me for $1,500. Now it's mild steel cage, but it's an 850 certified cage, and that's cheap even in 2013 money. So they do the cage for me, and so now I'm building this engine, and so this is we're way spiraling out of control at this point, right? I'm still planning on keeping it stock suspension, stock frame. I'm not planning on going too crazy. We're planning on just building like 1,000 horsepower engine for it because back then that was still a really big deal. And I'm working on the truck, work and I remembered at the time, Tim told me, "Hey, why don't you call and talk to Scheid? They're the best in the business. Let's talk to them about the engine." And so we had tore the engine down at that point to start rebuilding it. And so I remember I called up there, and I remember I asked for Dan, and they actually, put Dan on the phone. And I remember talking to Dan, telling him a little bit about what I wanted to do, and decided to take the engine there and let them do all of the machine work. So then, once that process started, it was a real slippery slope from there. I started thinking about beyond the 1050. Started thinking about that pro street, and how that's what made me fall in love with this was this pro street. And at this point, I've got a couple raises, and what I'm doing some side work, and I don't have any real life expenses yet. I'm still living at home. I'm daily driving a Honda Civic, so I'm not really spending any money on fuel. And I'm like, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's try to build this thing into a pro street truck. And my dad told me I was stupid. He told me from the beginning, he's like, you can't do that. The only people that can race at that level are business owners. You have to own your own business to race at that level. And, I'm a semi rebellious young kid. I'm like, well, I'm going to show you. I'll build that truck. And so the engine starts turning into something more serious. I get a call from Dan one day. He tells me I need to make a decision on filling the block or leaving it a water block. And that was like a real crossroads for me because I had, up to that point, I had still planned on street driving the truck. And I really wanted to street drive the truck. But he told me, he's like, above 1,300 horsepower, you're going to break the 5.9 block. And I knew that at that time, Pro Street was running realistically 6.0s because we had switched to eighth mile. So this would have been around 2014, 2015 range. And he said that 1,300 was the max. I knew that it was going to take every bit of 1,300 to be able to run with those guys. And I knew that by the time I had gotten the truck done, that they were going to be going faster. So I knew it was probably going to take more like 1,800 horsepower to run with those guys. So made the decision to fill the block. And that solidified my, okay, we're for sure going down the race car path. So then I had already four linked the front of it. I'd done a bunch of research on how to four link something. Four link the front of the truck, same four link that's in it to this day. So I was 19. I was 19 years old when I four linked the front of this truck, and everything that's in it is the same to this day. And then I started wanting to build a back half. I knew that the Grinch was my inspiration, right? And sometime around that 2014, I think it was 2014, Indy of 2014, Seth had the truck completely re-back halved and four linked. And I remember he had narrowed the rear end of it. And it was like all the buzz on the internet because it looked like a sled pulling truck because the front wheel still stuck out, but the rear ones were narrowed. And so, one thing that I have been blessed with my whole life is being very good at networking. And I've never been shy to talk to anybody, and it's really served me well in life. And I started going to every event that Seth was at, and I would talk to him at every event. I would look at the truck and I would talk to him, even if I could only talk to him for 5 minutes. If I had to drive 4 hours to talk to him for 5 minutes, I'd do it just to learn something about the truck to see if I could implement it into my truck. And the reason that they had narrowed that truck in the back like that was because of the groove that you're running at the racetrack. If you look at race cars, they're not very wide, obviously. My dad's Challenger is probably one of the wider race cars that are out there. And so the theory behind that is these big wide trucks, they weren't riding in the groove of the racetrack. Typically, the groove of the track it's got the best rubber. It's the most stable. It's where you want to put the tires in the track. And so they thought that their issues that they had with like spinning the tires and whatnot, overpowering the surface, was because they weren't in the groove. So at that time, there wasn't really any way to, nobody had ever done like narrowed the front. So they just thought, well, the back's doing most of the work anyways. We'll narrow the back of it and put it in the groove. And Fast Chassis out of Louisville is the one that did the work on that. And really, those guys don't get enough credit the more I think about it, because They had a 15, or I'm sorry, a 16. Back then, nobody had run 15-inch wheels yet, but a 16 by 14 rim on that 30-14 tire, and it had it stretched. And I had never seen stretched tire stuff like that before. And they were doing that to help stiffen up the sidewall so that way they could hit it harder. So there was a lot of things about the Grinch, honestly, that was ahead of its time, and that being one of it. So I started, I'll be honest with you, I started kind of copying some of the stuff that the Grinch is. I mean, if you look at the back wheels on my truck right now, you'll notice how dished they are. That's because I learned from talking with the guys at Fast Chassis and talking with Seth that the lightest way to build a rear end housing is to make the rear end itself as narrow as possible, and then just put all the dish in the wheel, because the wheel doesn't weigh anymore regardless of the offset or the dish. So if you look at this truck, and if you really know Seth's truck, or you take some time and look at it, you'll see some similarities of it over the years. Because I thought that was the truck to beat, and I thought that those guys were on another level, and I was basically trying to follow what they were doing. So I start, back half in my truck. I take it to my friend Tim's house because I'm still living at home at the time. My friend Tim, who's older than me, he's probably about 29 or so at this point. And, I'm 22. I take it to his house, 21, 22, and I cut the truck in half in his garage and completely did the whole back half myself. Back halfed it. Tim helped me on a lot of it. He helped me do pretty much all the welding on the truck because I wasn't comfortable as a welder yet. I'm still pretty new to fabricating, but I did all the tube work. And then another good friend of mine, Lester Johnson, he's my dad's age. I had raced with him his whole life. He's a really smart race car guy, and he really helped me. He's helped me throughout all of the years, but he's really helped me like understand a lot about racing stuff and kind of helped me get to the next level. And he helped me bend all the tube. He had a tubing bender, and he lives about an hour away from me. So at that time, he lived about an hour and a half away from where I had the truck. So I would drive an hour and a half to his house to bend one tube, come back, say, yep, it's good, go back, bend another tube. So I kind of made that back half as simple as possible out of the necessity of like not having to go and get more tubes bent. I wanted to bend as least amount of tubes as possible because it was like this giant waste of time for me to do that. But Lester is really the one who taught me fabrication. He taught me how to notch tubes. He taught me how to bend tubes. He taught me how to land tubes. Like he taught me a lot about the fabrication side of it, and I always credit him to my love of fabrication now. He originally helped me build the wishbones. We ended up doing a wishbone in the front, and at that time, I had never seen anybody do a wishbone on the front axle. It was rare to even see a four link, like an aftermarket four link on the front axle. Nevertheless, a wishbone. And that's all I credit Lester with that, because I basically called him and said, hey, I don't know what to do for a locator bar on this front axle. Can you help me? And so he sat and thought about it, and he thought, well, I still think the wishbone is the best for the front of that. So I remember I actually hauled the truck to him, and he actually built the wishbone. It's still under the truck. It's one of those things that I was actually just talking with my wife about this the other day. I said, is it stupid to be sentimental towards parts on a race truck? Because I could build that wishbone that's in it now lighter with what I know, but I don't want to, because Lester built that for me out of the kindness of his heart. He didn't charge me any money. He didn't want any money. He just wanted to help me. And I was like, man, I don't think I could ever change that wishbone just because somebody made that for me to help me, to try to help me get to where I wanted to go. So that just kind of tells you like what type of person that Lester is. And and so we end up with a complete chassis truck. I spent a not complete chassis truck, a back half, four link in the front. Like I have a chassis. It took me about 14 months of working feverishly to build it. I would drive about 100 miles a day. Where my mom and dad lived, I would have to drive over to Cincinnati, Ohio for work. I would work 10 hours a day there. I would leave there and I would drive to Tim's house, which was quite a bit further away from work, about another 30 minutes or so. He lived out in the middle of nowhere. And I would work on the truck there, and I'd only get to work on it a couple hours a night because of all the driving that I had to do. And so he used to make fun of me and tell me that you only get one tube a night done. And he was right. I really did. I get about one tube a night done on it. And so I would do that Monday through Thursday. Fridays, I always try to hang out with the boys, try to go out with, my wife at that, which at that time she's still my girlfriend. But then on Sundays, I would spend all day over there working on it. So it took me about 14 months, start to finish, to build the chassis on the truck. And for the most part, everything that's still on the truck is what I did back in 2015 is when I finished it all up. And so then by that point, simultaneously we're working on the motor while I'm working on the chassis. And I've, just, it was one of those things where I'd save up money, I'd spend it on the motor, save up money, spend it on the motor. And I got to the point where I had a complete chassis and I had all the parts to build a complete engine. So Tim and I started putting the engine together. It ends up being a filled standard bore 5.9 block. We had billet R&R rods in there that I had bought used. Had a brand new set of Wiseco pistons, which at that time was like a totally new design. It had the OEM style cylinder head that I had originally had Darren Morrison with Pro Street Diesel. He was a big name back in the day. I had him do the bigger valves in it, and then I hand ported it myself. Bought some shied valve springs for it, some shied push rods, shied cam, shied tappet, and then I had bought a Precision Pro Mod 88 turbo. So it was an 88 103 with the round V-band housing on it. And so I bought that turbo in 2016. And in 2016, nobody was running a round flange style turbo, and anybody that ran a header or knew anything about headers said that headers were junk. You can't run headers; they don't work. And I just couldn't, I just had too much of a race car mentality. Maybe I was just too stubborn, but I just couldn't believe that a header wouldn't work. And the thing with the round flange exhaust housing is that they spool like so say that housing's a 115, so it spools like a 115 but it flows like a 132. And so I just couldn't get around my head, like, how could that not be better than what we have? How's that not better than a T6 flange? And so I just was like, hey, I don't care, I'm going to build a header and I'm going to use this turbo. So I bought the turbo and I built the header, and I had complete engine at that point. And so, now we're basically into like 2016, 17 range. And my dad and I work on the truck. As far as the paint work goes on it, we got the cab painted at that point. We've got the bed painted at that point. Originally, I had a stock axle for the rear of it that I had. It was a stock Dana 70 that I actually had Mosier cut down and narrow it. And I realized that that was really heavy, and that by this time, Firepunk had stepped into the scene of Pro Street, and they had been, I want to say with that UCC truck originally, their first rendition of it, I want to say they had gone high 530s, like a 38 maybe. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it was 60s. It was fast regardless. It was way faster than I thought the class was going to go. And so I realized that, like, if I had any remote chance of competing at this point, I had to make the truck light. I originally had some steel wheels for it, some just cheapies to get me up and going. And I just was like, nope, none of that's going to work. So I bought a Fab 9-inch. Actually had a service truck that I had bought from work, and I actually flipped it to get the money to buy the 9-inch. And I bought a complete Fab 9-inch from Advanced Chassis. Still the same rear end housing under the truck today. They did an awesome job on it. Beautiful piece, chromoly housing. And back then in 2017, 2018 is when I bought that. And it was like $1,800 for the housing, which is like cheap, real cheap, even at that time. And so I got a good deal on this 9-inch rear end. And then that's kind of a slippery slope. Like I said, I got rid of the steel wheels. I bought a really nice set of aluminum wheels for it. The wheels that are on it now, those whole shot wheels are the lightest wheels you can buy. And at this time, kind of like an overlap to the story here is where I'm really communicating a lot with my now really good friend JP LeBear from out in California. And at that time, he was building a truly next level style truck. He didn't care about any classes. He wasn't trying to make the thing pro street weight. He was just trying to build it as light as possible with the best parts possible. So now by this point, I'm communicating with him a lot. We're bouncing ideas back and forth off of each other. So I absolutely have to credit him with the way that my truck turned out. He was definitely a big part of it on all of the stuff that's still nice to this day. Really have to credit that to him. And so anyhow, we get the truck together, or we're getting it together at this point, and I actually had the motor in the truck already. I had the bed on it, and I was waiting on the new rear end housing to come in. And I remember the opportunity pops up to buy the Grinch, and Seth decides to get out of it. Goes different direction in life. So this would have been 2016 was his last year. 2017, he's interested in buying the Grinch or selling the Grinch. I was actually the first person that he reached out to because I had told you that I had pestered him so much that he knew I loved the truck and he knew that I'd be interested in it. And so we go back and forth, and my wife and I now at the time, we were in the process of trying to buy a house. So it wasn't a good decision to buy a truck while we were trying to buy a house. And I ended up, we kind of decided, let's do it, right? And so Seth made us a good price, good deal on the truck. And so we bought it as a roller. And the original plan was, at this point, I'm 23 years old, so I'm still pretty dumb. I'm not real smart yet. If you ask my dad, he'll tell you that your brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25, and there's probably some truth to that. So I'm pre 25 brain, so I'm real dumb. And I had this idea that we're gonna put my engine in that truck and my transmission in it. We're gonna put a transmission together for it, and we're gonna race it. And then once my truck is done, where it needs the engine back, I'll just pull the engine out of that truck, and then we'll put a little 800 horsepower combo together, and then my wife can run 670 with the truck. Um, so you know that's what we thought we were going to do. So I take the engine out of this truck, brand new, never been fired before, and we start putting the Grinch back together. And we got the Grinch in June of 2017, early June, and I had it in my head that we were going to Rocky Top with it, and Rocky Top was like the middle to end of July, and so I take the truck to Tim's house where I built the chassis, and I just work feverishly on the truck, the Grinch, and Tim and I get this thing up and running. And at that time, I had an ag pump. I had a 14 millimeter 8600 pump on my engine. And if you've ever had one of those before, you know that unless you have a clutch, they're a pretty terrible idea for drag racing. They're very sensitive. They're a ton of fuel. You can make a ton of horsepower with them. They're just way overkill for what you need. And so we get the truck together. We get the engine broke in, and we back then, like, I wasn't big on testing, right? Like I don't know much about racing at this point, like at this level. But we get the truck together, and I knew that we needed to test it before we took it out there. My dad at least told me that much. Like, you got to test this before you drive all the way down there. So we take the truck to one of our local tracks, and no success with it. The pump was extremely hard to operate. It was really hard to spool. The converter that I had at the time wasn't doing us any favors on the spool up deal. And just really, we made 3 runs that were all terrible. The first pass, I launched it in 4 low. That's how like green and how quickly we threw this thing together. Like I didn't know anything, right? Like I had never driven a truck like this before, and I didn't even realize that it was in 4 low. So you can imagine how that weekend went. It was a mess. But then the next weekend, was Rocky Top. And I remember I had to swap the converter. I had to put a new converter in it because we burnt that one up. And the truck really needed nitrous put on it to be able to spool it. But, I had it in my mind we were going to Rocky Top. So I get this thing together. I spool it up one time and I'm like, cool, we're going. So we put this thing on, open trailer. We haul it through the rain. It rained all the way to Rocky Top. And we go to Rocky Top with it, and it rains at Rocky Top. And I ended up getting to make one nighttime run with it. And couldn't get it to spool. I had spooled it up before we left, and it did okay. And now this time it wouldn't spool, and so finally I do get up on top of the Charger. I launch it, and as soon as I shift into second, it breaks the intermediate shaft. So we are done for the weekend. So take the truck back home. Pull the converter out. Converter's toast again. Put a different converter in it. Another converter of the same ones that I've been using, and just monotony, right? And we went to our local track, and once again, just we had the same thing, had converter issues. So I never made a run in that truck. Is where I'm going with this. In 2017, I never made a complete pass in it because we just had issue after issue. That costed me enough money just doing that to where I realized pretty quickly yeah, there's no way that we're going to be able to operate two of these things. Like, it's going to take everything I got to operate the one I have. And as much as I loved the Grinch, I loved my truck more. It was my first truck, all the memories I had in it. I built everything myself with all my friends and family's help, and there was no way that I was going to give up on that. I had already done that once. I'd already given up on one of my projects that I had all my heart and soul in to go to another thing. It wasn't going to happen again. So we listed the Grinch for sale. I took my motor back out of it, took my transmission back out of it, pretty much all my stuff back out of it, and then we sold it as a roller. So we sold it off in 2018, and I just decided that I was going to focus all of my efforts into getting my truck back up and going. And like I said, at this time, I'm now talking really seriously with JP, and he's having transmission issues at that time. And this is when I start really becoming infatuated with transmissions around 2017. In 2016, like I said, Tim knew all the transmission stuff. And so he started teaching me how to build transmissions around 2016. And with all the failures that I had, I started becoming really interested in transmissions. And so JP and I would bounce ideas back and forth off of each other. And in the beginning of 2018, I decided to give Garen a call. Tim had built a transmission for my dad's '06 tow truck, and he had built it with all Garen parts. And I remember how nice those people were to deal with. And so I had this idea because of, I'm a race car guy. I'm like really into stuff. I'm always doing research. And I had this idea that, well, we can use a dump valve to help to loosen the converter up to help spool the turbo. So I get a dump valve from a company, and I put it in line. And if you've ever tried to put a dump valve on a lockup 47 or 48, you know how this story ends. You can't do it. It is not a captive clutch. It needs that converter pressure to hold the lockup clutch off. So I put this setup together, and I open the converter dump, and I do a spool up, and I trash a converter immediately. So I decide to call Garen and tell him what I'm trying to do. So I call up there and I talk to James, and James is now a good friend of mine. And James is like, oh yeah, just immediately knows like you can't do that. And he explains to me why you can't do it. And I was like, wow. Like I had talked to several other people before and they didn't know this, but James instantly knew I couldn't do this. And so I told him, well, what if we did this with a non-lockup converter? What if we just took the lockup clutches out of it? And, like I can't even get down the track to even be able to lock the converter anyway. So let's start with that. And he was like, yeah, let me look into that and I'll see. And I thought I'd never hear back from him again. Well, about 2 weeks later, James calls me back and he's like, hey, I built a valve body for you with this dump valve setup. So he's like, do you have a converter? If you have a non-lock converter, I'll send you this valve body. And I was like, yeah, I'll get one from the guy I was currently using at the time for converters. So I had that guy build me a non-lock converter. and we put it in, and the converter itself was way too tight. The stator was totally wrong for what we were trying to do, because the only person at that time that had ever done a non-lockup in a diesel was Jared Delecta. And I have to say that Jared Delecta with the industrial truck is really what made me like look at the non-lock like, well, maybe we don't need a lockup clutch because this guy's going really fast. At that time he had been like, he ended up ultimately going a 509 in the eighth with it. He was in the hunt for the fours back before anybody went fours. But he at that time was going like mid fives. And I was like, man, this guy's going plenty fast without lockup. So between talking with James and him building me a valve body and what I already knew non-lock was capable of, I was pretty convinced that that was the way to go. And so I talked to JP about it, and he was like, yeah, man, basically prove to me that it'll work and I'll try it. Because I really didn't have a race truck, worthy of testing at that point. So I put that setup in the Grinch. That was the very last thing I ever did with the Grinch before we took it apart and sold it. And I showed to him, hey, look, it increased the stall by 500 RPM. And he was like, okay, I'll try it. So I send all of my stuff to JP, and then we start talking a little bit more. And he's like, "Hey, man, why don't you just come out here? And if you come out here, we'll just spend the week working on this thing. We'll go to the track, and we'll do all this stuff together." And so to me, that was huge opportunity. I mean, I had been looking up to this build. He started that build in 2014, finished it in 2016, and so like it was, it had gone 530s right off the bat. Like this was a huge opportunity for me to be able to be hands on with a truck that was of an even higher caliber than what I was trying to build. So there's some things in your life that you take a chance and you don't realize what that chance nets you until later on down the road. I'm a big Stevie Fast fan. If you're into racing, you know who that is. And he always talks about the day he decided to take his orange radial Mustang to go testing when nobody else was testing, and how it springboarded his whole career by making this one like little seemingly meaningless decision. That was me deciding to go visit JP. I had never been on an airplane in my adult life. I had no memory of flying on an airplane. I was terrified. I'd never been to California, and I'm going to spend a week of my vacation time with a guy that I've never met before. And I'm so glad that I did, because there's so many things about my life that have changed ever since that day. We spend a week testing this non-lockup at the shop. We He had put some different pumps on the truck, some different injectors. We spent a week with a friend of his, Les. Really, really awesome guy. He was tuning the truck back then. I learned a ton about common rail stuff, learned a ton about tuning, and I learned a lot about uh, being methodical. JP is a helicopter pilot by trade. His business is agricultural spraying, so crop dusting essentially. And one of the things he really taught me was how to take a race truck serious, because in aviation you don't get second chances. So he treats a race truck like he does aviation, and it really taught me how to respect the machine that is a race car or a race truck, and how to be methodical about what you do with them. And that kind of ties back to what I said earlier about the whole bracket racing thing. So we spend a week together. We never get it to the racetrack because we basically spent the whole week learning. But it was a super awesome experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And basically, JP was like, "Man, why don't you do this for a living? Like, why don't you do this transmission stuff for a living? You have a lot of passion for it. You're willing to learn anything about it. Like, you've got some good contacts fired up. Because I'm communicating with Garen quite a bit at that point." And I had wanted to start my own business. If you remember, my dad told me I had to if I wanted to race at this level. So ever since he had told me that, I had it in my mind, like, well, you know what? One day I'll start a business then. How about that? And I just seen the necessity that was there. In 2016 to 2018, there wasn't a lot of really good transmission stuff going on with the 4748. There was a lot of people that had wrote it off. There was people that had considered that trans brake would never work in one. You'd never get it to bump. You'll never keep a second gear band alive in them. There was a lot of really bad stigma behind the 4748. And I just felt like there was room for improvement. I felt like everybody that was saying these things had only tried it one way and they gave up when that one way didn't work. And so, with JP's encouragement of doing it and his backing, I basically decided to take the leap of faith and I started Loganbuilt in 2018, November 15th to be exact. So I had a decent job at my construction company, but it wasn't like the greatest job. So it was like perfect time in my life. I'm 25 years old. I'm really hungry. I got a lot of passion. I got a good enough job to where I'm sustaining, but I don't have such a good job that I'm going to take this huge pay cut to go into business for myself. So I just put everything into the business. I went all in and I opened it up November 15th, 2018. And man, the first couple months in business were rough. Knowing what I know now, I think I'd have waited until about tax season time before I started in business because December to February are really, really slow in the performance transmission industry. At least everybody's recovering from Christmas and waiting to see what they get back on their tax return. So first couple of months were really rough in business, but it gave me time to like get my shop set up the way I wanted to. It gave me time to like come up with like a bunch of really good ideas and whatnot. And so for the 2019 season, JP and I had basically talked about like taking the 48 to the next level. I had a set of custom ratio 210 139 gear sets made. Nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever changed the gear ratios in a 4748. And since being hands on with JP's truck, and I'm starting to learn about chassis, I'm understanding the benefits of the ratio. I'm understanding shift drop. There's just a lot of things that I'm learning. And one of the Achilles heels of the 4748 is that second gear band. So I'm, really fixated on trying to figure out what we can do to make that second gear band live. We're trying to improve the trans brake at the same time because trans brake release is still a little slow. So it makes using a bump box really difficult. We're trying to knock out all of the things that people say make the 48 suck. And so between JP's willingness to basically be the dummy, the test dummy on this, and all the work that he had to do. I mean, there was at one point we had put 11 converters in his truck, just trying different stators and learning and understanding how they work. So really, without JP, in my opinion, the 4748 wouldn't even be where it's at today without his willingness. And then with James at Gearin, he was anytime we ever wanted to make a change on something, he never told us no. He always did it. Even if it was the wrong way, if we went backwards, we'd circle back. And so we ended up with this aluminum direct drum and special band combo for that. And then a 210 139 gear set in this 48 platform, and we were doing it with a non-lockup. And we put that together in early 19. JP and I were just talking about this on the phone the other night. And I believe our first event or our first time at the racetrack with it was April of 2019. And not only are we doing transmission stuff during this time, but we're also learning a whole lot about chassis. JP put himself through what he calls chassis school, where he was a chassis there for about 3 months during the winter and learned a lot of stuff. The thing with this 4x4 racing is that there is no book out there to how to do it. There's nothing from regular two-wheel drive racing that correlates. It's all totally different. You've really got to figure it all out on your own. And really, even to this day, like guys are just now starting to figure it out. Back in 2018, nobody knew anything about it. So we had to figure it all out ourselves, really. And so we started doing, when we put this transmission together in it, we started doing 4x4 burnouts. and we put it on small tires, 2810 5s, which nobody had ever done that before. We had made a bunch of changes to the truck. And the first weekend out with it, he had gone 538 back in 2016 pretty quickly. Like, or maybe it was a 32. Like, it was in the 30s, but he had like gone 530s within a handful of runs, and then he was stuck. He could not get past the 530s. He couldn't even get back to it because there was a lot of transmission failures happening with there, trying to learn suspension stuff. And so, from basically all of 2017, or at least midway through 2017 and 2018, it was a big learning curve to get us to 2019. And when we started doing the 4x4 burnouts with that transmission that I put together in it, within the first weekend, it went personal best ET and personal best 60 foot. That first weekend out, it had gone 123 60 foot, which was really unheard of back then. If you were going 130s, you were going fast. If you went a 126 or a 127, you were really doing something. So 123 was a big deal, and it went 522, I believe it was. So we were really happy about it. We had made it through a whole weekend with the transmission, not having any issues. And every time we would race the truck in 2019, other than like one or two times, I was there. I was flying out to California. I was hands on with it. I was looking at the data. I was servicing the transmission after the race because I wanted to be hands on with that transmission. I wanted to know exactly what we had. So we ran it pretty hard that year. Did a lot of he made a lot of passes in front of his shop. He made a lot of passes behind his shop. We calculated that we ended up between 2019 and 2020. We put somewhere between 50 and 60 runs on that transmission. And in the end of 2019, JP had the truck as fast as a 505. He had been 509, 508, 507, 506, 505. And he just couldn't quite get it into the fours. He had been 119 60 foot with it, and it had done that several times. It had done that 3 or 4 times, but it seemed like every time that he would try to turn it up to make it run a four out the back, the 60 foot would suffer. The tracks in California, what a lot of people don't understand, they're not very good. Sacramento was a nice facility, don't get me wrong, but if you're familiar with like what a track meter pulls, like I remember we were there for a private test session one time, and that thing pulled like 220, and people were jumping up and down, boys, turn them up, we're gonna go fast today. Like 220 is a joke. 220 is like bracket prep. uh like Ducks race, some of the radial stuff, it's like 700 plus is what it pulls. So it's nothing. Like an average ODS event will pull 340. So the tracks just were never really there to where we could put the pass together that we needed, that 4 second pass. And at that time, the only person that had been fours in a 4x4 truck was Levon. He'd been 497.6. And so JP decided, hey man, I think that it'd be beneficial for your business if you were racing this truck back east. I think that you could get it to the 4 second time slip just because you have the tracks available. And he knew that he was going to have a really busy year in business that year. And he just, thought that the truck would get more usage if I took it. So beginning of 2020, I go out to California. Me and my buddy Goose, we hot shot it out there, and we picked the truck up and we bring it back here, and it's never left Kentucky ever since. But we're really pumped up about it, man. I had never raced a truck at that level. At that point, my truck is still not done yet. The fastest thing I'd ever driven was my dad's race car, and I believe I was just foot braking it. I'd never left on a trans brake before. So he really took a leap of faith by allowing me to race this, state of the art truck. I mean, even to this day, there hasn't been anybody build a lighter one. There's stuff on that truck that still hasn't been duplicated. So it really says something about JP to be able to basically hand over his pride and joy to me and say, hey, go race it. And I did everything right as far as like the process. Like I went and got my license down at Ryan Milliken's track back when he used to own ECD, Emerald Coast Dragway. And Ryan helped me get my license. And so that was the first time I'd been five anything, was just getting my license. I remember I lifted in second gear and the truck went 580, and I had never been fives before or anything. It was wild. Um, so get my license. We go back to Florida for the first race of 2020, and JP actually, it just works out to where he could fly in. And so he flies in, meets us in Florida, and that's my first actual competition event in a pro vehicle. Aside from when I took the Grinch to Rocky Top that time, that doesn't really count. This is the first time I'm actually really doing something in competition. And we had tried a different stator converter, and the truck just didn't like it. It wasn't happy down low. I was still a really green driver. I almost crashed it a couple times, and but overall we had like a really good weekend to where like we had some direction moving forward, and we knew kind of what we were going to do. And then on the way home from that event, this COVID thing starts happening. And, while he's there, I mean, I remember him like looking at motorcycles because he was worried they were going to shut down the airport and he wouldn't even be able to fly back home. And he was like looking for an exit strategy to like, hey, I'm going to buy this motorcycle and I'm going to have to ride it home. And I remember my mom calling me on my trip home from Florida that Sunday, and she said, hey, when you get to Kentucky, if you want to get food at a restaurant, you better stop and eat tonight because they say they're shutting them down and we don't know when they're going to open them back up. And yeah, so COVID hits and the whole world shuts down. And man, that really sucked. We were really planning on like doing all these ODSS events with the truck, and now we can't even find a friggin' racetrack that's open. So I swapped the converter over on the truck back to what we knew worked, and then I'm looking for a place to go race it. And I'm looking, at that time we couldn't hardly find anything, but I'm also looking for good prep, right? Because we knew that the prep was our enemy out there. And so I find that the only place that was doing something was down in South Carolina. And so, I'm new into driving this truck and I'm new into racing and I'm fired up and I'm like, I don't care. We'll drive 9 hours if we have to. So me and a couple of buddies of mine, we drive down to South Carolina and we enter this event and basically just to make some runs. And on the first run, we were having an issue at that time where it wasn't shifting out of second to third, like the shifter wasn't commanding it properly, and it ended up being some smart wire stuff that I had messed up because I was green. And anyways, so we go out there and we make this first run, and I've noticed that the truck had this like vibration, right? And I was like, man, that's weird. So we jacked it up and, we're looking everything over and I don't find anything. And we just drove 9 hours. So like, I wasn't ready to just like call it quits yet. So I go out there and I make the second run. Well, on the second run, the shifter doesn't shift again and I lift. But this time when I lifted, the truck is shaking really, really bad. Like there's something definitely wrong with it. So wrong that I just thought like, get the chute out. So I threw the chute and I went to get on the brakes. And I was a little hesitant to get on the brakes because I didn't know what was shaking this thing so bad. Well, it turns out it was the front drive shaft U joint was seizing up on us. Well, it seized up, locked up, blew the transfer case apart, and I was sliding all over the track. Luckily, thank God, I think God was looking down on me and not let this thing shift into third because, I mean, if I was going any faster, I would have crashed it. And, I'm using the whole racetrack to get this thing stopped because I'm sliding around in oil. And so that humbled me up real fast. I actually, I kind of felt like I was getting a little bit of an ego, and that took all my ego out immediately. Realized that hey, you're not as good as you think you are. So that took some time to get the truck put back together. The transfer case that's in it was custom. Had to build another custom transfer case. Junked one of the wheels. Had to send the wheel off. It was hard to get parts because nobody was working because of COVID. And it ended up taking us like all summer just to put the truck back together over something that wasn't even really that big of a deal. We just couldn't get anything done. And we ended up taking the truck testing locally in September with some really promising results. We had went to a track that had minimal prep. It wasn't prepped very much, and we had gone 118 60 foot which was the best it had ever gone. It was a 118 with a 5, and went a couple 119s and one 120. And we were just working on 60-foot testing. Uh, we kind of like that was pretty new. That was something that like I had never done before. Just go to the racetrack and only go 60 feet. Um, so we were just working on the short part of the racetrack there and lifting it was going 530s again. So I knew that like this thing had some potential in it. So we go to, we plan on doing the last like big event that like chance that we have of the year is Donald Long's radial tire no mercy race in October. And so it's radial prep as could be. We knew the prep would be on point. We knew we had the truck working good. Like if we were going to try to go a 4, like this is where we're going to go a 4. And down there, like we could enter radial versus the world, and you'd get 5 qualifying runs. Well, qualifying runs for them start on Wednesday night. I couldn't take off that much time, so I had actually planned on leaving Thursday, and so basically we would have like Friday qualifier, Saturday qualifiers. We'd have 4 qualifiers, and then if somehow we made the field, we'd race once on Sunday. Well, some stuff, some weather came in down there, and they ended up cutting a couple qualifiers out. And we get down there, and my first pass, the nitrous doesn't turn on. The one kit turned on, but the main kit didn't turn on. And so we're trying to figure out why that's not working. And I missed my other qualifier. Getting it basically just was an error in the smart wire again by me when I went and changed some stuff. So finally I get it figured out. But now we've only got one qualifier left, and it's Friday night, and they're moving the racing into Saturday morning because they had more weather coming in. So we go out there Friday night. We only got one shot at the track here, and we're trying to go 4s. And at this point, I'm like, yeah, it's not going to happen. I'd be happy to do anything. At this point, I hadn't been faster than 530s in the truck. So we go up there, do a burnout, back up. And we were the last pair to go down the racetrack that night, or the second to last pair. And it was really, getting towards the end of the night. And, I spool this thing up, I bump it in, and I let go of the button, and it went 117 60 foot. It was our cleanest early pass that we had ever made. And I mean, this thing was a rocket ship. And it goes out there, and it short shifts the overdrive shift. So the 1-2 shift was perfect. The 2-3 was like pretty close to where I wanted it, but then as soon as it shifted into the third, it only hung out for a second and third, and it shifted into overdrive, and it went 502. And I mean, I was pumped that we went 502, but I was so sad because I knew that short shift on the overdrive robbed us of our 499. And I was like, well, we had our chance at it, so we're like, well, I guess we'll have to try again next year in 2021. Well, as we're pushing back, it's a really big event, so it takes a long time to get back to your pit. I hear on the radio or on the announcement speaker, they say, okay, people who qualified for Radio versus the World, and they're going through, and they say my name. And they're like, Logan Yelton, you have qualified for Radio versus the World. And I remember, like, you'd have thought I won something because I remember, like, hanging out the door, like, listening. And they said that, and I'm like, yeah, we get to make another pass. And so, I didn't care that we qualified. I knew we were going out first round no matter what. But, like, I get one more shot at this racetrack. So we get back to the hotel, and it's like 2 a.m. at this point. And I'm up on the phone with JP, and I'm going over the logs with him. And so we just decided, like, hey, we're going to speed the nitrous up a little bit early. We're going to fix this 3-4 shift issue. And, we got a free chance at it. Let's see what it does. So the next morning, I go up there, and I race Melanie Salemi. And she is a really well-known, she's got a real deal Radio versus the World car. And, she was running 350s. So obviously we don't have any chance. I'm only up there trying to go a 4. And so I told her before we went up there, I said, hey, I'm just here to run a number. Make sure that you do not red light. Like, don't give this away. Like, I'm just trying to go 499. Okay, so you got this in the bag. And so she kind of laughed, and she shook my hand and whatnot. And man, it was such a cool experience because we were the first pair up for eliminations. They always ran Radio versus the World first, and so the tradition is that they do the national anthem, and as soon as the national anthem's over, you fire up and start your burnout. So I got to be a part of the like start it up and do the burnout, and so we did the 4-wheel drive burnout, and everybody always thinks that's cool. And we back up, staged it, took the tree, and let go of the button. It went a 119 early or a 118 with a 9 because it spun a little bit because we had sped it up early. We put some power in it. Spun just a little bit, but because the track was so good and we had the chassis so figured out by that point, it just kept on driving out. And so, I stayed in it. And when I went through the traps, like I couldn't even hear the truck running because she's in a screw blower car, right? So like when we took off, I actually did tree her a little bit, and like by the time I'd moved probably 10 feet, she's already coming around me. And so all you can hear is that screw blower. And, I got a front row seat to her driving off to a 355 pass. Well, I'm at South Georgia. It's a quarter-mile track. You're running eighth mile, and the scoreboards are at the quarter. So when you go through the eighth, when you lift, you can look up at the scoreboards and see what you ran. So as soon as I'm off the throttle, my eyes are staring at the scoreboard, and 497 pops up. And I don't even think I can adequately describe to you how overwhelmingly excited I was. I'm screaming in the truck. Like my voice is like when I get out of the truck, my voice is all, and I'm just pumped up. And, I get the truck slowed down. I still remember to do my procedure to slow it down. And I come around the turn, and it's like common for Radio versus the World car to be parked in the return road to come home, and waiting for your pit guy to come down and pick you up. And so there's a line of RBW cars just parked right in the middle, and all I care about is getting this time slip. Like I'm ready to do whatever it takes to get to that time slip because I've got to have the proof that it went 497. And so I come around the turn, and I'm like, oh man, there's this line of cars and the time shack's up there. I'm like, I don't care. I went and drove around the grass and drove around Melanie in the grass and drove around a couple other people. And like they're looking at me like, what are you doing? And I'm driving up to the time shack. And, because most of these cars, you got to shut them off as soon as you lift off the throttle. And I'm driving up, and I get out of the time shack, and they hand me the slip, and then I know it's legit. And man, it was probably the coolest experience that I've ever had racing before. Racing my truck for the first time was really cool, but there's really nothing like going 497 at that time. That would have been the record. We won a 97 with a 3. So we just barely beat LeBron's 497.6. So we had the 48 door car record. But at that time, there was only 5 of us that had ever been forwards. So you feel like you've entered this like elite group of people when you do something like that. So it was just super cool. It was so awesome to be able to call JP. And I remember I called him up, and it was really early where he was. Looking back on it, he probably woke him up. And I was like, hey, how's it feel to be the owner of a 4-second truck? And it was just awesome. So we came out of that. And we had already had the engine sold. My buddy Jordan, we knew that he was buying it, and JP had already purchased another engine because at that time, Stainless had the overall 4x4 record. They had been 86, a 486, and we knew that we were going to be really leaning on the engine combo that was in his truck to try to outrun that. Because at the time, all we really cared about was like having the overall 4x4 record, 4x4 diesel record. And so we knew that it was going to take more power than what we safely had on tap. And Jordan already needed the engine for his project. So JP had acquired another engine, and we had sent it off to basically get freshened up and get a couple things updated on it. And so we had plans of, running the truck in 2021 with the new engine combo. things were really weird, started getting really weird with COVID. Like at the end of that year is when we started noticing shortages of stuff. You couldn't get certain things. Like I knew in my business, I couldn't get certain clutches and certain steels that I used to normally be able to get no problem. And so, trying to refresh an engine during that time was very, very hard. Like, especially when it needed pistons and stuff. Like, it kind of got sidelined that whole year of 2021 because of the part shortages. So, what that allowed for me to do, though, is while we were taking a break on that truck, it allowed me to focus on finishing mine. I had been working on my truck uh, really any time that I had time to. I'd been picking away at it, and I was getting to the point where it was really close. I had it as a complete truck in 2019, so by 2020, I've got this thing close to running. And then early 2021, like January, I actually get the engine running in the truck for the first time. So it's actually like able to move under its own power. And with January and February being my slow season, I was just putting everything I had into it, all the time I had, just getting the truck ready. And I really wanted to debut the truck at UCC in 2021. UCC was like they didn't get to do it in 2020 because of COVID. In 2018 and 2019, UCC was a really big deal. So I thought, like, man, wouldn't it be cool to like make my first passes ever in front of like all these people? And by that point, like I had a pretty decent social media following. Like a lot of people wanted to see the truck, right? And I thought it'd be cool to let everybody see the truck, make its first passes. So I really strive to get it ready for UCC, which took longer than what I expected to. And we were working on that thing up until like the night before UCC. And I took it to UCC, and I told this story before, so I won't get into it too much. Because if you want to know about the first passes of the truck, I got a whole video on that. Just go all the way to the end of my very early videos, and you'll find it. But basically, we get the truck at UCC, we get it ready, and we go out there. And my very first full run down the track, it goes 607. Which, by this point, I had pretty much given up on pro street dreams, because at that time, pro street trucks had been as fast as in the fours. I knew that it took bottom fives to compete with those guys, and I didn't have nothing for them. They created the 590 class as an in between class. Between Pro Street and 670, so that's where I was going to try to live at, was in there. So ended up making it 2 rounds that year, and then on the way home from that year, had a little incident where the golf cart smashed into the front of my brand new race truck that I just debuted. So that sucked. So that set me back. Had to get that fixed. I was so disgusted. I didn't even want to look at it, much less take it to the racetrack. And then, man, when it's really hot here in the summer, it's really hard to race. It gets brutally hot in July and August. So I kind of just waited until September of that year to get back after it. And then during that time, I actually got accepted to take the truck to World Cup finals, import versus domestic, which was one of my bucket list races. It's one of the, if not the coolest race that you can ever attend. If you ever have the chance to go, I promise you, you won't be disappointed with it. It's exactly what it sounds like: imports versus domestic. They have the best import race cars in the world show up, and they have some really cool domestic cars that show up. And then they, have a ton of classes, and they battle it out. The culture there and the fans are just like unbelievable. It's not like anything that I've ever been to before. And so to get the green light from Jason Miller, the director of it, to be able to take the truck there was a really big deal to me, because a diesel truck had never been to import versus domestic before. So really was really looking forward to going up there. And so I was testing the crap out of the truck. I mean, I think we tested it 4 weekends before, and I had got it to go a 595. And so I was like, man, this thing is promising. Like, I'm going to be able to run 590 in 2022 with it, no problem. And, I thought, well, if I can go 590s, like, I know I can go 890s up there at World Cup. And 890s is about what it was going to take, I thought, to qualify. And I was doing YouTube stuff back then, but I really wish that I was like doing it more seriously, because if I would have done videos of that weekend, it would have been really awesome. I didn't even really talk about it a whole lot. We go up there, and I'm on this 315 radio. I don't know like I know a lot about chassis at this point, but I don't know anything about radial chassis stuff on 4x4s. So I'm trying a totally different approach. Even when JP told me not to, it's one of those deals that sometimes you just gotta try stuff. And it wasn't the right thing. Like, it was way too much energy early, and then it was out of energy. It was a bad deal. So I go up there the very first run I get to make, and the Miller prep is known for being really, really good, but the front wheel drive cars are really bad about tearing up the racetrack. And the class that I'm running is primarily front wheel drive cars, because it's the most entry level class at the race. It's True Street. So most of those cars are comprised of, geez, if I can talk, of front wheel drive cars. And so anyway, so I go up there, and I don't know much about, like, I'm pretty green, right? I don't have a crew to like line me up and whatnot. And so, anyways, I end up leaving in some glue, but also in some a bad spot in the racetrack, and it leaves on more boost than what I was expecting it to, because of the really cool air. The DA is super low, and so this thing leaves on a bunch of power. It spins, and then as soon as it spins, it hooks like really quickly, and then it spins again and hooks again. And when it hooked that second time, it completely grenaded the transfer case. I mean, just boom out the bottom. And I had heard what that sounded like before from when I tore up JP's truck. So I instantly start pulling over off the truck. Like, as soon as my brain recognizes what happens, I start pulling over, and Jason Miller's yelling at me, "Stop, stop, stop." And I'm like, oh, man. And I mean, that thing did. It just gutted the transfer case right there on the starting line. And so then I got in trouble, because if you oil the track down there, they hate you forever. But so we get pushed off, and I'm like, man, that sucks. Like, this was my one chance at World Cup, and here it is, first run. We just gutted the transfer case right here. And I'm like, well, we're done. I don't have a spare transfer case. And buddy of mine, Chris Maston, they're watching the live feed, right? And he's coming up later that night. He's flying in. And he's like, hey, man, do you need me to bring you a transfer case? And I'm like, well, I do have one, but it's a stock one. Like, I'd have to like rebuild it. And he's like, well, if you want me to, let me know, because I got to head to the airport right now. So if you want me to pick up a transfer case, I got to go get it right now. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. And so I'm like, hey, I called the guy that owns the building my shop's at. I'm like, hey, let this guy in my shop. And I'm telling him, like, hey, the transfer case is over here. I know I'm going to need these parts from over here. And so he rounds up all the stuff. And if you've ever flown before, you know that you can't bring on anything more than 100 pounds in a suitcase. And he gets there, and he's got this thing all wrapped up in a suitcase, and this thing is 101 pounds, so he can't bring it. So he's trying to get on his plane, and he's like unwrapping, like moving blankets out of it, and he's like puts the bare minimum in it, and it's 99 pounds. So they're like, okay, it's good. It cost me like $230 to get it on the plane. And so he literally flies in with my new transfer case, and he gets there at like 11:30 at night. Okay. And I have to completely, like, these transfer cases are not like a stock transfer case. Like, they're very custom. And so when I found out that he was coming, I need a drive shaft, right? It destroyed the rear drive shaft. I called a drive shaft shop in Baltimore that said that they could build me a drive shaft. We drove 2 hours from the track to Baltimore, got the drive shaft, drove 2 hours back, and then I needed a couple pieces. Luckily, Sarah had picked up most of the guts that were off the track, but there was one other piece that I needed. So I went up to the track officials, and they had it over in a bucket. I grabbed that piece. My transfer case shows up at like 11:30 at night, and I start working on this thing. And I had never built one of these transfer cases before. I'd built the one that's in JP's truck once, but mine's different. It's a passenger side drop. There's a lot of different stuff about it, and I didn't know that. And I'm going through this thing, and I'm like, oh man, like this isn't going to work. Like I'm not going to be able to build this, all because the like the little cover area that holds the pump in on a 241 is different on a passenger side drop. And I'm like, man, the only way I can do this is I have to cut the tail cone off of the one that I have right now, like the busted up one, and weld it on to this pump cover. And I'm like, who the heck is here at the track that I know with a welder? And I remembered a guy I knew, David Farlow, was there, and he is a fabricator. And so I called him, and I was like, and at this point it's like 1:30 in the morning. And I'm like, hey, David, do you have a welder at the track? And he's like, yeah, of course I do. So I come over and I show them what I'm trying to do, and they're laughing at me. And him and a guy named Josh Tonsky, who's a really sharp guy. Josh is actually the one that welded it, but they're like, "You're a little bit crazy for doing this, but we'll help you because we think it'll work." So we weld up this deal, and I mean, it took us forever because he's using this little Lincoln welder, and it was a mess. But so we get it done. It's about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, okay, I know that I can now put it all back together in the morning. We're the second class out for the first qualifier. I need to get some sleep, or for my next qualifier, I need to get some sleep. So I got some sleep, and it was so cold there that night. I was frozen. I mean, it was like 32 degrees outside, and so I get up real early the next morning. I start putting the transfer case back together. It takes me a while to do because I'm having to drill and tap some stuff, plug some stuff. It's a couple hour process, even moving as quickly as I can. Get the transfer case all together, and I get it put in the truck. And they said, hey, we're moving the qualifier till later in the day. We're like, okay, cool, because they had a bunch of oil downs and stuff. So I had plenty of time to get it all together and got it together, ran it through the gears up on the jack stand. Everything seemed happy with it. So it seemed like it was good to go. So we end up for the next qualifier. They told us, they said, this is going to be your guys' last qualifier. We were supposed to get two more after that, but they had oiled the track down so much, the class that I was in, that we kind of got punished for it. So they took all our qualifiers away except for one last chance that I had. So we had just gone through this crazy deal of getting all this stuff done, and the announcers had even found out about it. And so, I go up there to make my qualifying pass, and they're talking about he flew in a transfer case and he did this and that. And, that's the spirit of World Cup finals and all this stuff. And it was really cool. Well, of course, that like during this time, like I haven't had time to like address the suspension, right? And to be honest with you, I really don't know that the suspension is that much of an issue. I just know that I'm trying to get this thing back together so I can go race it. And so we go up there for the last qualifier, and I leave off the button, and I feel it spin. And as soon as I felt it spin, I lifted because I didn't want to break it again. And then, like, I lifted, instantly realized it was the last qualifier, and got back in it, which is against my. That's a no-no. If you have to lift, you should be done. But I got back in it. It was under the turbo, and it just. And then, when the power came back in, it tried to drive left real hard on me. So I had to pedal it. And then I was doing all time-based shifting at that point. And so when I pedaled it, it overdrive basically tried to come on. So it made a 2-4 shift basically. And it was slow, but I ran it all the way out because I was like, you know what? I'm here. I'm going to put on whatever show that I can for the fans. And I'm going to say that I went the full 1,320 feet at World Cup. So I ran it all the way out, and it went like 1080s. It was really bad. And the bump was a 930 something. So I didn't qualify. But man, it was so cool because so many fans came over and bought t-shirts and hoodies. Like I had just made a round of shirts before we went up there, and we sold out of every hoodie that we had, and we sold out of almost every single bit of apparel that we brought up there because those fans thought it was so cool that I broke and that we got it back together, and they got to see it make a pass. And like that's what racing's all about, man. Like the people that are fans of racing, they are loyal and they are hardcore fans of racing. So that pretty much, brings us to the end of 2021. And then in, 2022, we're still not racing JP's truck. We're, got engine dilemma stuff that we're just can't get parts for it and whatnot. So I'm going to keep on racing mine. So 22. Usually, I'm changing a little stuff over the winter, whatnot. The radial tires were a little bit of a problem for me because I have a 10-inch wheel in the front, 10-inch wide, and the 315 radial that was on it was just way too big. And so I wanted to put a slick on it so that way it was more forgiving. I was really getting tired of going to places and spinning the tire. Uh, the end of 21, I had actually gone my best 60 foot ever. I went a 135 60 foot, and it went 377 to the 330, which on paper puts me on track to be about a 576 to a 578. But I was only running short track with it, and I really wish I would have ran it all out so we knew. But I was just doing short track testing after the failure at World Cup because I changed the suspension and stuff, and it was showing really promising. That was fuel only, no nitrous. So I felt like, man, we got a pretty fat the potential to have a fast truck here. So I decided that for 2022, put it on slicks. I decided that I was going to try my hand at Pro Street. Not to be competitive in Pro Street, but just so that way I could have a place to race to actually run it all out. The 590 deal, not saying I won't maybe end up back there one day, but for right now, I'm still like, I want to see what I can do with this truck. I built this truck with the goal of running Pro Street with it. I want to see if I can make it run the numbers that I thought it could run back then, and then, figure out what I want to do with it from there. So in 22, that's kind of my plan. I'm going to see how fast I can make this thing go. Um, I wasn't very good in 21 about working on my whole program, right? Like when I would go test, I wouldn't even stage the truck. I would just turn both bulbs on, then spool it up. So I wasn't a good racer because of it. I had lost the racer edge in me that I had when I was racing, like actually trying to race JP's truck. So I wanted to get back to that. So in 22, I basically focused my whole season on procedures, burnout procedure, staging procedure, like everything, right? I made a bunch of passes where I never went past 60 feet. I was working on 60 foot. The slicks were a whole, new deal with me because I was trying some Hoosiers. I've always been kind of trying something with the truck. And so I always knew that 2022 was going to be just a learning year for me. And I knew I was going to go backwards way more than I went forwards. And that was really the case. My best pass in 22 was a 640. And I had been 590s, 595, and with the potential to go even faster the year before. So really nothing to write home about in 2022, aside from the fact that by the end of the year, I had a burnout procedure down pat. I had really the whole like process of like, okay, when we get to the track, we're going to do this. We put the fans on it here. Like I had my process figured out by the end of it. And so then for 2023, I thought I'd be in a good position to really get after it. So then the end of 2022, I find out that I made the cut for the Drag Illustrated 30 under 30, which was a really big deal to me. They came out with that in 2015, and I had been kind of wanting to pursue that ever since it came out. And it was such an elite group of people that I figured I never would make it, but it was just something that I always, kind of was striving for. And I figured out that year that I actually made the cut for that year. So that was super cool, awesome way to finish out the year in 22. Making it on, and then they actually put me on the cover of the magazine. So that was honestly, that was really close. The way that made me feel to the 497 run. That is a highlight of my life that I'll probably never ever forget. I feel like I could stop racing right now, and that's an accomplishment that most people will never have. So I'm really, really proud of that. And then, so going into 23, we still don't have an engine for JP's truck. It's not looking good there. Some things have changed in JP's life. Racing really hasn't been on the topic for him. The truck's just been sitting here idle. So I'm going to continue on again with pushing my truck. So 2023, it seems to be a reoccurring theme here. It seems to be like I start off every year with my first event being at UCC. We go to UCC and we actually have a pretty decent showing at UCC, but I just can't get the truck to run good. I can't get the thing to 60 foot. I can't get the thing to ET good. Like, yeah, I remember at one point it went like 650s. And it's like I had just put a 98 millimeter turbo on it. And so, like, that had me questioning if I went the wrong way on the turbo. But, like, everything it was showing seemed to be, like, the right way with it. And so, anyways, I think I ended up getting down to the quarterfinals in Pro Street there, just out of luck, really. And then I found out that I had some ratio stuff messed up. I was trying some stuff with some different gear ratios, and I actually went the wrong way. So I had a bunch of ratio taken out of the truck. And I'm kind of glad that that happened because it proved a lot of things to me. It proved to me that the way that I wanted to go with the ratio was the right way to go because the way I didn't want to go slowed it way down. So I know that the way I want to go is definitely going to speed it up. Um, so then I'm running the truck a little bit. Like I told you guys, I don't really do the summertime deal around here. I had some really long injection lines on the truck. Found out those were a problem. Took those off, and then I went to Bowling Green, which was the next event, and ran Pro Street again. And by this point, like I'm feeling pretty like good about where I'm heading. I've got my burnout procedure down. Like I could stage the truck really good. Like it spools fast. Like I'm proud of the truck at this point. and and so I go up there and like the first one was like 630 something. And I'm like, okay, that's an improvement. And then the second one, it went a 627. And I'm like, all right, it's improving. Like I'll take this. If I can keep picking up a tenth every lap, before long I'll be back to where I wanted to be. And then so first round, I'm obviously the slowest qualifier with a 627. And so I have to run Justin Ziegler, and Justin's capable of going 490s at any time. So I knew that I wasn't going to win, but I knew that if I had any chance, I had to tree him. I had to nail him on the tree, and I had to hope that like he didn't make the pass. And so I ended up actually I nailed him on the tree. I went a 030 light, or I'm sorry, I went a 060 to his 130 light, and that put me about a truck length out on him. But I had some logic messed up, the old shifter deal, and this thing didn't shift. It did not shift out of first gear. At this point, I hadn't figured out my ratio deal yet. So with the first gear ratio that I had in it, it was able to go about 300 feet before it ran out of RPM, basically. This thing went to 6,700 RPM on that run before I basically realized that, hey, it ain't shifting, and I lifted. Was kind of worried about that. So we brought it back, and I was done anyways, obviously. But, we started up, listened to it, like checked the valves, like everything seemed to be okay with it. So we're like, okay, cool. So at this point, like I'm doing some more work on the truck. We take it back home. I find out that the injectors that I'm running are just massively too large for what I'm trying to do. I put some smaller injectors in it. They showed really promising results during spool up. It's looking really good. So I go in September to take the truck back out and just want to run it with this injector change and see like how much it picks up. Because it was crazy how the difference of how well it spooled and how clean it was during spooling. So I felt like it was going to make a lot more power. So I go out there and I do the burnout, and I noticed that it was a little bit harder to spool in the burnout than what it normally is. But then once it came up on boost and started the burnout, it was fine. I was like, oh, okay. Backed up, everything sounded fine, everything sounded good. I went to take the tree, and this thing wouldn't spool. It was like I was just drowning it out with fuel. And I should have stopped right then and there. And, of course, you know better afterwards. But I didn't. I backed it off a little bit, and I feathered back on the throttle. Nitrous turned on, and this thing comes up on boost, comes right up like normal. So, I stage it, let go of the button, and it felt pretty good. Spun just a little bit, but like 30 feet into the run, I heard it. It started nosing over, and I heard like what sounded like gear on gear, and I instantly shut it off. And when it was coasting, it was, grrr. And I've never heard what a Cummins rod sounds like when it leaves the block, but somehow I instantly knew that it was a broken rod. And sure enough, that's what it was. So I still have yet to get the engine out of the truck since then. It's on my list of things to do. But what I'm pretty confident has happened by what I have seen of it is that I stretched the rod bolts down in Bowling Green when I spun it to 6,700 RPM. I should have taken the engine out of the truck, should have pulled the pan off, should have checked the bolts, probably would have found that it was stretched, probably could have saved the engine. But hindsight's 2020. Here we are with a failed engine. So that pretty much was icing on the cake for the 2023 season. We didn't really have much of a season there. So moving forward with the truck is about the point of the story that we're in now. Um, we're building, obviously, having to build a brand new engine. If you guys have been following along on the channel, you've seen plenty of info about that, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. We got some new people that are coming on board for this engine. I've been talking to. I don't want to necessarily like go too deep into it yet, but it's looking really promising. I have learned a whole lot about mechanical engines over the last 2 years, and I've learned a bunch of the wrong ways to do it. And so now I think that between the people that I've talked to and the experiences that I think I have a pretty good understanding of the right way to do it. And so when we come back out with the truck, I honestly don't know when that's going to be just yet. I'm going to make sure that I do this right this time around. Not that I didn't do it right the last time around, but I want to make sure that I've got some really nice components for this new engine, and I want to make sure I don't tear them up. And I want to make sure that this new engine is going to be capable of making the power and being able to hold the power. Because when we come back out, I want to really try to lean on the truck, and I want to try to go fast. I guess I'll just say it. I kind of want that 12 valve record. Uh, it doesn't mean anything to anybody, right? Like it's a micro record. Nobody really cares. But for me, if you remember from the story, the Grinch is the truck that got me into diesel drag racing. Like it brought me back to drag racing. And the fastest that he went with that truck was 541. That's still the 12 valve truck record. So I want to go 540. That is my goal, is to say that I ran right there with the Grinch, outran the Grinch, whatever you want to say. Um, and I did it with like similar style stuff, 12 valve, 48, pro street weight. Like it's just a personal thing. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything to anybody. But that is my long-term goal, really, is to get it into the 530s. My cage is only legal to 535. And so my kind of long-term goal for the future here is to run up against my cage cert. And who knows? That might be totally unrealistic. It may never happen, but I don't care how long it takes. I'm here for the long run. I'm here for the learning of it. And I always like to bring any of the information that I learn onto my channel here so I can try to help everybody grow, keep the sport growing, and, keep everything going in the right direction. So this is a pretty long-winded conversation that we just had. I'll probably end up cutting this up into at least 2 different sections because I feel like I've been going for like 3 hours now. So that is a pretty good rundown of my past. Started with Grandpa, ended up here 2024 with me. Still in business, still doing the 48 thing, still getting into Turbo 400 stuff, more mainstream racing type stuff. I have a lot of, business wise, I have a lot of ideas. I might not have $1 million, but I got a million ideas. And my other plan for 2024 is to, really implement some of this stuff that's been rolling around in my head, get more parts coming out to you guys, get, business going in the direction that I think it can go, and bring you guys along for all of it. So the next podcast, I'm gonna do a deeper dive into some of my like life with my friends. So like the first person we're gonna have on next is gonna be my buddy Goose, Andrew Geisey, and we're gonna like talk about like what got him into diesel stuff, and like he's been with me since the beginning, right? His truck was the one that got me into this stuff, and kind of like his perspective on it, because he's not a competition guy. He's never raced his truck, but he's a, he's an automobile enthusiast. He's a diesel enthusiast, and so it'd be cool to hear his story. And then after that, I'm going to have my good friend Tim Wright on here, explain. We're going to talk all, like, he's a wealth of knowledge with diesel stuff. So we're going to talk about all the racing that we did together. I didn't touch any of that, but Tim and I raced a couple different trucks together, and we learned a whole lot together. So I got some people that are going to be coming on the podcast here that I think that you guys are really going to get something out of. So that's it for this one, guys. That's pretty much everything that you really need to know about me, from beginning to where we're at currently, and the plans with me in the future. So if you're new here, click that like button, click the subscribe button. If you like this podcast style format, please drop a comment below and let me know. If you think that it sucks, I want to hear from you. I'm here for any criticism, good or bad, because I ultimately want to put out videos that you guys are going to like. So that's all I got for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.